Hello, I'm Jennifer Thompson.
And I'm Chad Thompson.
And we are your hosts of The Premise, where we get to the story behind the storyteller. And this season 4, that's right, we're in season 4. We've got some amazing storytellers lined up, and we really appreciate you listening. Be sure to subscribe and rate us wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening. Let's roll.
Autobots, roll out!
Hello and welcome to The Premise. So, Chad, today we are here with Deborah Holt Larkin. Hello, Debbie.
Hi.
You don't mind if I call you Debbie, do you?
Absolutely, I'm not. I'd like you to call me Debbie.
Okay, good. In the book, you're Debbie, so I've come to know you as Debbie. But I would like to read to our listeners your bio, and then we'll dive right in. Oh, okay. Hi, Chad. You didn't say hi.
Oh, hi.
Oh, there he is.
We're back again.
We're back. All right, friends. Deborah Holt Larkin holds a bachelor's degree in American history and literature from the University of California at Davis, and she studied creative writing at the University of California at San Diego. She has a master's degree in the education of exceptional children from San Francisco State University. She spent more than 3 decades teaching students with special needs before becoming an elementary school principal. And today we are going to talk to Debbie about this fantastic book that I'm holding in my hand. It's a very thick book called A Lovely Girl, the tragedy of Olga Duncan and the trial of one of California's most notorious killers. So again, Debbie, welcome to The Premise.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
You know, this book, I just have to tell our listeners, has been absolutely fantastic. It's impressive because it's two books. It's a memoir written in the first person, first narrative, and it's hysterical. I mean, I laughed out loud a lot. Chad can attest to that.
It's a murder story.
I know, right? Chad's like, what is so funny? And then the other side is the crime, the true crime that's written from the omniscient third person. But you do such a good job of balancing what is really a horrific, gruesome crime. And this, what I almost picture your family as like a sitcom, like a Lucille Ball-esque sitcom. It's frankly hysterical. Really well done.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Your father in particular is quite a character. I love how you bring him to life. His general attitude about life, about religion, his attempt at being a handyman, which really brings levity to many of the chapters and made me laugh. His manner of speech in particular was so well done. And I love how when he's speaking, he uses, huge words and concepts that you, the 10-year-old narrator, don't quite understand as a child. As a reader, we see him clearly, though. Was that easy to do? Did your father come to life very quickly, or did you have to kind of go back and work at it to bring his personality forth like that?
Well, people do ask me that, and the answer is I hear his voice. My dad you're right, he was a character. He was very dynamic, and I can still hear his voice in my head. But part of that, I was able to bring that back, is not only was he a newspaper reporter who covered this horrific crime, he also wrote a weekly column that was, kind of like if any of your readers know of Irma Bombeck or maybe Dave Barry.
That's exactly what it made me think of. Yeah.
Right. In fact, sometimes people used to ask me, what's your book about, real fast. I used to say, well, it's Dave Barry meets Anne Rule in Fargo. Because it was, kind of those 3 things. But anyway, my father saved many of his old newspaper columns, and quite a few of them were about the family. There was on all kinds of subjects, but there were quite a few about the family, and he had them in this. By the time he was older, he had them in this black trash bag in his home office, and he would just, cut clippings out and put them in there. So when he passed away, I asked my mother if I could have that bag. And so when I
Mm,
read those old columns
it
that,
came back to life.
reminded me of things that went on in our life, I
Oh.
could hear him again. So that was part of why I was able to do that.
Well, that makes sense. It's so well done. I kept thinking to myself, how did she capture this so
Yeah,
perfectly? And I knew you
yeah.
must have
And,
had some clippings because I think at one point we actually get to hear some of the clippings, and there's
right.
one in particular. Oh my gosh, there's so much I want to talk to you about. We're going to be here
Oh,
a while,
good.
folks. There's this one where your sister, Betsy, who is also hysterical, her
She is.
personality is so great. I want to know what she does for a living. Has she read the book? Did she approve? I have lots of questions.
Okay.
But she wanted
Yeah,
mousetraps. And so he wrote this
right.
piece about, the mousetraps. So tell our readers about this. And don't worry, our readers, listeners, we will get back to the true crime part. Tell us about this mousetrap situation.
Well, uh, my dad, as you mentioned, he was always doing these handyman projects at home
Mm-hmm.
on the weekend, and there was a store nearby. It was kind of an old Western store, but a farm store, but it had everything you could ever think of that you would want to buy was there. So he would go there on the weekend to get something to help him with his project, and we would frequently want to go along. And we were there, and Betsy just she insisted that she wanted to get these mouse traps. At first, I think she wanted this really big ones, and then he finally talked her into, a package of three. And Betsy was very always interested in mechanical things. Where
Mm,
my father, if anybody had given her a little bit of instruction, she probably could have done the handyman things around the house when she got a little older. So she and it was different then. It didn't seem like they were watching what we were doing all that much. So we got home and she went in the refrigerator, loaded them up with cheese, and put them all around the house.
and it,
Hoping that she could catch a mouse.
but instead she caught your father.
Right, because then once he talked to her, he said, you got to bring him out, and then we're playing with him, and uh, one of us asked, "Do you think you could, I don't know, what was it, trip the trap without getting your finger caught?" And so he takes on the dare, and no,
Of
he
course he
got his
does.
finger caught.
He was
Hmm.
not one to stand down a challenge.
No, no.
Well, in the way that you write this book, there's so much tension. There's tension in the family side, and there's tension in the true crime side of it. That's really well done. And I wanted to ask you about that tension. In fact, there's one point in the book where I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, I hope she doesn't get away with it, the murderer. And then I'm like, oh, wait, I know the ending.
That's interesting because one of the people that my friends that I write about, Judy,
Hmm.
um, in Judy in the book, the one that went to the churches with me and fishing, um, I asked her to read the book early before it got published in case there was anything in there, that she would object to that I wrote about her. And she said the same thing to me. She says, when I got to the end of the trial, I'm starting to get to be really worried that even
Nervous,
though I
yeah.
know the whole story, yeah.
I
So
mean,
I'm glad you felt that.
that's impressive. Yeah, you really captured the tension of the trial and brought us through. Like, it was so well done. I want to get to the research eventually, but let's pause a moment and tell our readers really what this book is about. Who
Okay.
is this lovely girl, and tell us about this true crime.
Okay. Now, can I say one thing about the tension? Because I know some of your audience may be writers themselves.
Absolutely. Please
Um,
do.
so, first, I had somebody read it who was an editor, and he recommended that, maybe I cut some of the family chapters a little because it maybe was slowing down the chapters of the crime. And so, I didn't really pay attention to that suggestion he made because I just wanted a lot of those family chapters in there. But then when an agent was first interested in my book and she read the manuscript and she said, I'm up in the air a little bit on this, but she said, I feel like as the book progresses, especially once you get into the trial, that the family chapters are slowing the tension of the trial and it's to move along quickly. And
Hmm.
she said, if you're willing to rewrite that, then I'll take a look at it again.
Oh,
And
wow.
so when I read it, I said, okay, I get this. Because sometimes when I'm reading a book, I think, oh, come on, let's move on. I want to know what's. And so that's what I did. I did cut a couple of I call the family chapters. I did cut a couple of them. I combined a couple of them. And
Hmm.
so you notice as you read the book, once you get to the trial, that it's not just every other chapter.
Yeah, I did
It's,
notice that.
a couple of chapters, might be a number of chapters. So yeah, I consciously tried to ramp that up for the
For the reader.
once we got to the trial, to
Interesting.
ramp up the trial.
I
Yeah.
did notice that. But I was so caught up and, captured by this, frankly, this crazy true crime. I mean, this trial, and it's
Yes, it
so
was.
much about it is like, you can't make this stuff up. I know in the
Exactly.
inside flap, it describes it as, straight out of a Greek tragedy. And boy, they ain't kidding.
Yeah. Right.
And it keeps getting more and more so, like, as we go on in the trial and we find out more and more and more, it's unfolding in a way that is just, um it's perfect. I mean, did you ever
Right.
think to yourself, I mean, I want to say this as a writer, like, how lucky am I that this is so crazy, it's going to make such a good book?
Right. Well, I didn't exactly think about it that way. Well, I did actually when I was reading the transcripts for the trial,
Mm,
that everybody testified, and you could hear their voice,
mm,
and I would say when my reading critique writing group that I would go to, I said some of these people are just writing my dialogue for me.
right.
All I have to do is cut things down a little bit. But one of the things that I did believe, because it took me 9 years to write the book, and
Mm,
sometimes I would talk about it with friends or just briefly tell them the crime. And I don't think I ever told just a brief synopsis of that story to people without people being super interested in it.
mm.
So I felt like that I had a story to tell. It had stuck with me all of these years, since I was 10 years old. It stuck with me for 50 years and more, that this story
Yeah.
and Olga's tragedy. And so,
Tell
yeah,
us.
I felt like I had I had a story that people might want to read if I could just get it down on paper, right?
Well, and you did it well. So tell us, what is this
Tell
book
us.
about? Yeah, give us the
Okay.
synopsis.
Okay. Well, Olga Duncan was a 7 months pregnant nurse in Santa Barbara, and she was married to an up and coming criminal defense attorney by the name of Frank Duncan. And Frank wasn't living full time with Olga at the time she disappeared because Frank was having problems with his mother, Elizabeth Duncan, and she had threatened to kill herself if he didn't move back home and live with her. So Frank, dutiful son that he moved back with mom, and but he still went over to visit Olga sometimes,
His
and went
wife.
over in the evenings. His wife,
Right.
excuse me, yes, his wife. He went over and visited her, and they got married in June of 1958, and she disappeared in November of 1958. And they would only, he started immediately back and forth between mom and Olga within a few days of the marriage. But the night Olga was disappeared, Frank was home with his mother, and that night she'd invited two of her nurse friends over to what they said in the trial was hot buns and coffee that night. And she was showing Emma off some of the baby clothes that she'd made for her unborn child. She was 7 months pregnant, and the friends left at 11:10, and Olga Duncan was never seen alive again.
Mm,
So her brutally beaten body was found a month later in
yeah.
just a little shallow grave off a lonely road in Ventura County. And I will say that right now that Olga lived in Santa Barbara. Frank lived in Santa Barbara. His mother, it was Santa Barbara. But when her body was found, it was found just a couple of miles across the county line into Ventura County, which is where I lived and where my father was a newspaper reporter. So it became a Ventura crime
Hmm.
because she was killed at the gravesite. So
That's right.
anyway,
Yeah.
the true crime part or the family part came from that. I was just her disappearance was a pivotal moment for me. That's how I describe it. It was the first time I realized that, you know, life was really dangerous and that our safety wasn't guaranteed. And I was already a kind of an anxious girl to begin with. But the mystery at first of what had happened to Olga, it scared me and it fascinated me. Um, at the same time, I was safe in my home, my little bit of a crazy family, but still a very loving family. And so while um, this crime and the mystery was unfolding, I was reading my father's articles. He was the reporter who covered the case. He was writing the articles that were headline articles in the newspaper. Um, and I was a kind of a little bit precocious about
Precocious for
reading
sure.
it.
Yeah.
But I was the daughter of a newspaper reporter,
Hmm.
and we had newspapers all over the place. It wasn't just the paper he worked for. He took the L.A. Times. He brought on other papers. So and also I was kind of interested in whatever my father was interested in. I was very much a daddy's girl,
Hmm.
and so I read the paper. I read his columns too,
Yeah.
and so.
I want to
So
ask you
that's,
something about that,
yeah,
though,
go
real
ahead.
quick. So,
Sure.
the thing that I find really fascinating about your father is like, on the one hand, he's saying, Debbie, don't worry about it. This doesn't concern
Yeah,
you. Like, he knows this is not a topic for a 10-year-old girl. But by
exactly.
the same token, you ask these very adult questions. You do your own
Hmm.
research. It's almost like from behind the scenes, you're pulling these newspapers out of the waste bin. You're searching for answers. And then you're asking very
Yeah,
grown up questions. And he says at first, he tries to wave you off, usually while he's trying to do something poorly, like,
right.
put in a garbage disposal. but
Right.
then he answers your questions in a very adult like way. And
Yeah,
I
he does.
wonder if in some ways maybe he wasn't proud of your curiosity, that he really saw himself in you.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I know he was proud of me. I'm not sure about for that reason, but um,
Or he
yeah,
just
he
couldn't help
always
himself talking about it, you know? Because he
right.
did. He always
He
answered.
couldn't. He
Yeah.
couldn't. He was a big talker, but he always talked to us as as if we were adults
Mm,
in many ways. I always used to say, those standardized tests they used to give us when we were in school, vocabulary.
mm,
Boy, did I ever ace those
I
because
bet.
I had had such a high level of vocabulary. I was exposed to that, from as a very young child. And he talked to us about all kinds of different grown-up ideas that weren't that
Hmm.
I didn't put in the book, but political kinds of things. And so yes,
You know,
he did.
go ahead.
He did. And I think I've said this. I don't know if I actually said it in the book. I've said it in other things that I've written about it. My dad didn't have a filter really.
Hmm.
He just really said the kind of the things he thought. And after I wrote this book and it was published, I got contacted by one of his former colleagues at the newspaper, and this man was a young man at the end of my father's career, but he said to me, you really got your dad right.
Mm,
He didn't have a filter. We never knew what he was going to say in the newsroom.
yeah.
So I felt good about that.
Yeah. I really felt like he came to life in such a beautiful way because he's such a kind man. And yet
He
he's
was.
like, in so many ways, he's so silly, like he's trying to do things that never work out, from trying to
Right.
jump the car using jumper cables rather, and trying to install the, the garbage disposal.
His
And
disposal. Yeah.
your mother is she's so calm. She's this calming
She's
spirit.
uh, she said she was a saint.
That's a good way to
they were
describe her.
they were a good match that she was so calm and he was so volatile. And so they were a good combination.
Hmm.
Um, but anyway, I lost my train of thought. I forgot what your question was. Sorry.
Well, actually, I wanted to go back to that vocabulary. One of the things that I love
Okay.
so much about the writing is this little 10-year-old who is trying to figure out big concepts. And you shared that with us. You would say to your dad, "What is this word demeanor? What does this mean
Yeah.
exactly?" And you're
Right.
working through the process and you're giving away everything so we know what's happening, but we also get that you don't get it. And that was what really
Right.
well done. Did it take quite a bit of editing to polish that, or did that happen pretty easily for
Well,
you in the writing process?
I belong to a writing group at San Diego Writers Inc.
Oh
and
yeah,
I belong to
wonderful
it
plug there.
from yes, and I've belonged to that. Weekly
Hmm.
bring in 10 pages, so I got a lot of help from that group in their feedback about does this sound right,
Mm.
and
Is this
it
believable?
was.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's believable. Sometimes I would be told it's not believable, but that was in the trial, and I have to say, well, I'm sorry, but that's what
but
really
that's what
happened.
happened.
But one of the things that I have said, and I'm not exactly how I thought about how it all worked in, because it was kind of an unconscious process for me. But I was both an elementary teacher um, for I think about 15 years. And then an administrator, and the last 15, I was an elementary school principal. So children and their voices and their thoughts and the way they
Mm.
think about things was sort of the soundtrack of my life for many
Sure.
years.
Yeah.
So I have a pretty good sense, just editing myself, if this sounds like what a child would say. And um, I wrote this in what they call the creative nonfiction, narrative nonfiction, so that when you set up scenes, there are going to be, as long as you don't change the truth of the story about or what happened, that you will set up scenes where there's a little extraneous things that you do just create. And that scene, one of the scenes in the classroom where we're doing the sharing and everything, and I knew exactly how to write those other children talking, really,
Mm.
um, because I'd listened to their little voices all those years in my career.
There's this one
So when
scene.
the
Go
one
ahead.
little girl says it's a sharing, and I think we're supposed to bring in something about civic responsibility, and it's Christmas time, and she's got this uh, a Lions Club group that's doing a nativity scene, and the teacher says, "Well, could this be civic?" And she says, "Well, my mother says that the Lions Club is a civics organization," and she and kids just that's that kind of stuff they do all the time. They just kind of extrapolate that,
Yeah.
how they see the world.
10-year-old Debbie brings in newspaper clippings and reads them to the class
Yeah,
as part of show and tell. And the
I
teacher is
tried.
like, she's trying to stop you. And there's this one scene where you're reading as fast as you can and you're sort of leaning away from
I
her because
know,
she's trying to take the clipping away from you. And I just got such a good sense of who, 10-year-old Debbie is, and this little girl
yeah,
who is you're so serious, and
I
yet,
was.
so the innocence really comes through. You were also seeking religion. You were looking for answers or
I know.
comfort. And
Yes, I was.
it plays a big part. And of course, must have really frustrated your father, who's an atheist. I believe he's an atheist.
Right. He was, yet he did gave us some religious training. But yes, I would say that that's what my grandmother said he was. Um,
Oh, and the
but
grandmother. Oh, I love her.
I immediately, for the religion, I always felt like that my family was sort of seriously out of whack with the
Mm.
rest of the neighborhood because they
Mm-hmm.
all went to church, and we didn't. And so I kind of thought that if the going to church would make us more normal. And
Mm.
then when Olga disappeared, I immediately went on high alert. Um, and I was worried that maybe I couldn't count on God for protection because we didn't go to church. And because my grandmother called my father an atheist. So I believed that going to church would make us more 1950s normal and help guarantee God protection from bad things happening. So I never was really deeply religious in this. I was looking at it as a way to find protection.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew my friends prayed to God for protection and, to
So you
help
thought,
them.
well,
And
yeah, there must
I
be something
thought
to
I'd
this.
like to do that too.
You
Yeah.
just hedging
And
your
my
bets.
parents,
Yeah.
yes, exactly. And so my parents were very laissez-faire about these things.
Mm.
And they said, I think I asked my mother at one time, well, what did you think about that? Judy and I were going to all these different churches, and she kind of shrugged and she said, well, we just thought that you would, find your own spiritual path as you grew up.
Yeah.
So they didn't seem to have very many concerns about that.
There's this
But
one.
yeah, we were out of whack. My father didn't have the same interest as the other fathers, fishing or hunting
Mm-hmm.
or poker night or those kinds of things. Even though I feel like that we were very well liked in the neighborhood, but we were just a little bit off.
Well, and that came through in the book too. This idea that everyone knew that, Bob is a character. Bob's going to do what Bob's
Exactly.
going to do. But, everyone loves
Exactly.
Bob too. He's a great
That's
storyteller.
right.
He's
Exactly.
entertaining. But, God loved Bob. He's going to need some help with the lawnmower. I'll send Gene over right away.
Right.
have
Exactly.
you have you thought about this book as a movie? I think
Well,
every author does,
uh,
right? But
I know. I guess I can say this. I don't know. My agent is right in the middle right now of negotiating film rights
I don't
with
think
a
you can
production
say
company.
this.
Oh, uh-oh. Well,
well,
when
we'll
is this going to be on? No,
well we'll
we're
see
almost
what.
done. It is almost done. I won't say the name of it or the name of the company or anything, but
Yeah,
anyway,
you got to
yeah.
keep that
So
under wraps.
possibly, maybe you should edit it out. I don't know, but possibly, what they're
Oh no.
interested in is film rights to do a limited streaming series.
Oh,
So
brilliant.
they want an option. So who
How's
Oh,
it?
knows
see,
if
I
it
was
would ever
hoping for
get
Cohen
done?
Brothers. Did you?
Speaking
Oh,
of Fargo,
I thought of them too.
yeah. And honestly,
Yeah,
like the wackiness of your family and just some of the things that were happening. And another thing that you did so well right out of the gate. I mean, honestly, I don't read true crime. I've never had a desire to read
yeah.
true crime. It's not my thing. But I was
Hmm.
just hooked from the beginning because of your family. And like you're at the
Yeah,
dinner table and you're like your father's upset about something, your mom's trying to be the peacekeeper, Betsy wants another biscuit, you're stuffing sugar cubes into your mouth. I mean, there's this beautiful chaos that's kind of happening.
was
And
chaotic.
but when we sense that, but in a very humorous way. And I thought, my God, I cannot wait to see who plays these characters. Because it's just
Yeah,
so, like I said, it's like a sitcom. It's very Lucille Ball-esque, 1950s.
yeah,
And you did a great job of depicting 1950s, or late, I should say, late
yeah,
1950s Ventura and, that sleepy beach community that you grew up in. I really felt
yeah.
like I was there. And I've been
Right.
there,
What
so
a
that's helpful.
paradise when I look back.
Yeah,
A
right?
paradise when I look back. That small town right there next to the ocean.
It's so
It
beautiful.
was. It
Yeah.
was great.
And, just
But
it's changed so much.
yeah.
I could feel it, I could feel the air and, the breeze coming in or, it was really well done. When did you
And if you
decide? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, if you go to the town and you look up on the hill, that courthouse
Mm-hmm.
is still up
It's
there.
still
It's
there.
still majestic and looking down, but it's now City Hall. So
Mm, got it.
but it's still there. No, go ahead. What were you going to ask me? Sorry.
Well, when you said this book took you 9 years to write, when did you
I did.
decide that, you know what, I'm going to do this? I'm going to write this story.
Well, at first, well, to go back a little bit, I always thought that I wanted to be a writer. Um, and when I went off to college, and people would ask me, well, what do you want to do after college? I would never tell anybody that I wanted to be a writer because, it sort of seemed like such a lofty goal. And I ended up like a lot of women that graduated in the early 70s. I went into education. I became a teacher, which I loved. I loved my career. But I never really gave up the thought of being a writer.
Mm.
So when my youngest son went away to college, I immediately started the classes at UCSD in the creative writing. And I wanted to do something with this story, but I thought I would fictionalize it. And so I have a number of false starts with that, first chapters of books that went nowhere because I think you said it earlier. This story is stranger than fiction.
Yeah.
And I realized that maybe, and maybe it was suggested to me that editors and publishers would not be wanting to try to publish this as a fiction because is too unbelievable. So then I
Isn't
thought
that
maybe I
great?
would,
I just think
yeah,
that's so beautiful that it's like it has to be nonfiction because otherwise they won't believe it if you make it fiction.
exactly, exactly. So then I thought, well, okay, I would write it more as just a straight true crime, a police procedural with a more journalistic style of writing and everything. And I didn't really like so much what I was writing, but I joined San Diego Writers Inc. I took some classes there first, and then joined a read and critique group. And so, you bring in your 10 pages every week. And so sometimes I would bring in pages about my family and about my dad, the personal essays. And then other times I would bring in things about the Duncan case. And I hadn't been in the group very long when I brought in a personal essay. And I don't get to, I say that it happened, but the time when my father, when his lawnmower, his power lawnmower that he named after Mrs. Duncan, chopped off the ends of his two fingers, because that happens quite a
Oh my.
few years after.
Oh
And
no.
and so, oh, I have it in the epilogue. It's in the epilogue that's what happened with
Well,
it.
you're not supposed
Yeah,
to tell us
it
that.
just the tips. Oh, well, anyway, so I had brought this one in, and so they knew that I was struggling on what to do. And the leader of the group, a man named Mark Clemens,
I know
said,
Mark.
Debbie,
Yeah. He's great.
yeah, okay, Mark said, why don't you combine the two?
Mm.
You've written these personal essays about your family that are very entertaining, and we know your dad covered this murder trial. And then you have this story, this crazy story, because I had, told him that what it was about. He said, why don't you combine that two? And I thought, you know what? I think I can do that. That's a great
Mm.
idea. So
That
I
is a
give
great
credit.
idea. Yeah.
Uh-huh. I give credit to Mark for whenever it comes up, because he was the one that made that suggestion.
It's such a lovely counterbalance, to the crime. And then we get the levity of this,
Yeah.
precocious young lady and this gregarious man. And, the family scenes are so good, as I've said. Let's talk about the research. So
Okay.
you'd mentioned in the book, there's 4,000 pages of accumulated transcript. Tell
Five.
us about, did you say five?
Yeah.
5,000.
5,000.
Okay. Did you sit down and read all of that? And if
Yep.
so, how in the world did you decide what to keep and what not to keep?
Well, that was difficult, and my book is long, but I even had more pages, and I just had to, just had to cut some of it. But I think I say in the note to readers at the beginning
Mm-hmm.
that the the dialogue, or the words from the witnesses are, come directly from the transcript, but I did have to edit for clarity and for brevity. So in a transcript, the DA or the attorney say, well, what's your name? Did you live here? So there's a lot of stuff that's going back and forth, and they might give a very short answer. He asks the next question, another short answer. So I combine the question and just put in, just any way I could to shorten it down a little bit. But I felt that I got in everything that was important to the story.
It certainly feels like you did. Yeah, I was very interested in the fact that in the beginning of the book, you did, in fact, tell the reader that I've combined some characters. And,
Mm-hmm.
obviously I don't remember all of the dialogue from my family. So some of it is, based on what I remember to be true. But
Right.
in making those decisions, like, for example, there were many detectives working on the case, but you created
Yes.
one character, which was brilliant.
Right.
And there are times when we get the inner thoughts of a detective or a Gustafson, the DA. And I'm just wondering, where did you get these ideas for their inner thoughts and like the little personal pieces that brought those characters to life?
Well, uh, for one of the characters, Charlie Thompson, he
Hmm.
was real. And so I was able to speak to his daughter. And
Oh, wow. Wow.
she told me about, after he got suspended, about him going back to Chicago and what happened there and why he decided that he would stick with Santa Barbara. And the way I found out that he was suspended is when I was researching the old Santa Barbara newspapers, there was this little article. They don't do that anymore about, Detective Charles Thompson was suspended for 2 weeks because he used profanity towards his boss, Lieutenant Peck. It was right there in the newspaper. So I was
Again, just
able to
perfect.
yeah, I was able to ask his daughter about that and what she knew about it and everything. So I had some ideas of Charlie's personality, and she sent me some other things that had been written about her dad in the paper. So I had some ideas about Charlie. Uh, um, for the DA, Roy Gustafson, again, this was just, dropped from the heavens for me.
Mm.
I had access to his unpublished memoir about the
Oh,
Duncan case, where he had in there,
wow.
I can see where it didn't get published. It was sort of dry and everything, but he
Uh-huh.
did write about some of the things he thought about during the trial, what he thought about witnesses, how he thought he had ruined his case. He was afraid
Mm-hmm.
because he, brought out testimony that maybe wasn't really allowed. So, and he had opinions about what he thought about Frank Duncan, what he thought about Elizabeth Duncan, some of the
Mm.
things that he couldn't use about them because it wasn't admissible. So that was just really a godsend. And also, this is also in the epilogue. Um, when in the mid '60s, 1960s, the Ventura DA's office discovered that all of the Duncan transcripts were missing from all of the trial, and they would search and search, and they couldn't find it. Um, and then on this is another piece of that puzzle. There was also a boy that was about 2 years older than me who was a paperboy delivery at that time of the Duncan case, and he was reading those headline stories as he folded the papers for delivery, and that's his name is Bob McSorley. And so now, fast forward, uh, how many years? 40 years. And in the early 2000, he works for a law firm that was founded by this DA, Roy Gustafson, after he left the district attorney's office. So the law firm is closing down, and Bob is in the law library. He's an attorney in the law library cleaning it out, and up on this top shelf, he finds these bound transcripts, and he opens them. Well, they're the Duncan transcripts,
Oh my gosh.
and so he knows what they are because he was also fascinated as a child by the
Right.
case.
Yeah.
And so he contacts the DA's office, and they have those back, so that by the time I contacted them wanting copies, it was available. And
Wow.
then also, next to those transcripts, he found the unpublished memoir of Roy Gustafson.
Wow.
Roy had just put it all up there, and that later he was appointed as a judge and everything, and he
Hmm.
left, and that was all there. So I heard that through a mutual friend that because Ventura, when we were growing up, was kind of small, and my friend was getting married to her high school boyfriend. They were multiple marriages between them, and I asked if Bob McSorley she thought would be there, and she said yes. So I spent the entire reception trying to figure out which one might be Bob McSorley.
So you can get
And
the details you need. Yeah.
yeah, so could I get a hold of that memoir? And I was missing part of the transcript. Could he get, so anyway, yeah,
Wow.
so
So
that
wait,
was
So are you
really,
playing Powerball this week?
yeah, I
because you
know.
should.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy.
Wait a minute, wait a minute. So she married her high school sweetheart after she had divorced someone else?
Two other divorces. It was a
Wow.
third marriage. Yeah, I think it was her fourth marriage and Mike's third marriage.
And did
Marilyn
it,
is in the book. Marilyn is the one in the book. Yes,
Marilyn, she
and
lived
she
across the
married.
street. Yeah.
Yeah, uh-huh.
Did
And
it
they
did the
went.
third one or did the fourth marriage work?
Oh
Just
yes,
curious.
very successfully. And yeah, in fact, I mentioned them at the very last chapter when she doesn't go to swim practice because she's out cruising Maine with her new boyfriend Mike and his hot rod.
Right.
That's something we just pass right by most people, but I stuck it in.
That's awesome. I imagine there's quite a few little Easter eggs like that in the book.
There
There's
is.
there's one I have a question about. There's a scene where you and your friends, Marilyn, I believe, is included, and Judy, start the
Hmm.
Helpful Club. You have a lemonade stand,
Yeah,
and you're raising money to buy
right.
a doll for a young girl
Hmm.
who lives at the mental hospital where your mom works because she doesn't have her
Right,
own doll.
right.
And your mom is trying to explain to you what schizophrenia is, and she
Hmm.
says, kind of, offhandedly, "I hope I live long enough to discover why it appears in children. What causes it in
Right.
children." Did did anything ever? I mean, have we figured anything out about that?
They don't call it childhood schizophrenia anymore. It has, I think, bipolar and other things, but that is not a label that's ever used anymore.
Hmm.
But yeah, what my mother also used to say is, I hope I live to see a cure for schizophrenia, including
Oh,
adults and everything. And
yeah.
she would say, well, surely if I think I have this in the book, surely if it's not in my lifetime, it will be in your lifetime. So,
Hmm.
it's just such a crippling mental illness, and they still don't really, they can certainly treat it much better than they did back in those days, but it still, really, really impacts people's life who suffer from that, from schizophrenia and
You,
their
s-
families.
yeah, yeah, and you speak with such compassion, and your mom has such compassion. She's really
Yeah,
an advocate for, people who suffer from mental illness. And she says over and
she
over again,
is.
they're not crazy, they're mentally ill.
Hmm.
And I
Exactly.
wonder about, you took the time to include those parts in the book. I'm guessing it mattered to you.
With having uh, Beth was appeared in our lives at the same time as the Duncan trial was going on, made me want to put that in the book, and because I was kind of confused about Beth's mental illness and Mrs. Duncan, my father said, well, she's crazy, but apparently she wasn't crazy enough because she
She's not
wasn't legally insane,
insane. Yeah.
right? And so that just impacted me trying to sort that out, the difference between this woman who truly was not in touch with reality and not really able to care for herself, and then Mrs. Duncan, who was so manipulative
Hmm.
and crazy like a fox. I think my mother said at one point, or my
Yeah.
father. I don't know
Well, and she was a sociopath or maybe even a psychopath.
exactly.
There's
Right.
no doubt
Exactly.
about that.
Yes. Yes, no doubt.
She You did a really good job of depicting her in the court scenes, the look on her face, and I wonder, were those things in the transcripts?
No,
The demeanor of
no,
people.
no, but they were in the newspaper,
Oh,
in
your
some of the
dad.
newspapers. They put a lot more detail back then, and especially there was this terrific newspaper. It wasn't terrific in my dad's eyes, but for my purposes, called the Los Angeles Herald, and I changed the name of that newspaper in the book. That this woman reporter reported for, and it was sort of tabloid like. And
Hmm.
those stories would have all kinds of information about scenes in at the recesses, and also how Mrs. Duncan was behaving and what she was wearing. That's another thing.
God bless
Detailed
it.
descriptions of what people were wearing. A lot of
Yeah.
actually, it was more than just the Herald that did that. A lot of them did that. My dad had some of his articles. He would say describe the witness and what they had on, and so yeah. I mean, I just had so much information to work from.
This character you're speaking of, this female reporter, Benny Jo, is
Hmm.
her name in the book.
Yes,
At
right.
times, she seems so perfectly placed because it gives the reader an opportunity to know what your dad is thinking. So Benny Jo would
Right.
ask your dad, "Well, why do you think that you're doing that, or what's the point in doing
Hmm.
that?" And your father would
Exactly.
have an answer. I mean, was that your
Yes,
purpose?
that was that was what do they call a literary device? I don't know. I didn't know much about Benny Jo. Her real name I forget. It was a reporter in the for the Examiner, but I did know what my father thought. I knew
Mm.
the kinds of things that he thought during the trial, what he thought about the case, and so I used her as sort of a, a spoil the right word, I don't know, to for me to be able to get his thoughts out during the trial. And again, this is written in the style of creative nonfiction, narrative nonfiction, where you're allowed to use some literary type devices to tell the story as long as you stick to the truth
Stick to the facts,
and
ma'am.
to stick to the facts and don't make up anything. Now, whether Benny Jo said some of the little things that she, she didn't say those things. Those were things that I used so that I could have my father saying what he believed and what he thought.
But one thing you did tell us is that Benny Jo never got a byline.
Right. Uh-huh. And I noticed that from all of the stories. There was
Wow.
no byline. My dad had a byline on every story he wrote during that time,
Yeah.
and she didn't have any bylines. I only knew that she worked for it, was covering that uh, because of an article my dad wrote in the for the newspaper about the various journalists that were covering the story, and that
Yeah.
line about um, how do you split up the work between Benny Jo and her the male reporter that was there from the paper. I believe he was Ed. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
my dad asked him, and he said, "Well, whenever I can, I let her do all the work."
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And
Wow.
I had Benny say that actually in the book, but yeah, that
She
came
did.
from them.
Well, and I love the
Uh-huh.
character you create for her. She was fabulous.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So here's a question. Take us totally off this track. Do you play the accordion?
Not anymore.
Oh
I did. I picked one up when I was probably in my 30s or 40s a garage sale. I was in my with Tom went and my husband and I were there, and he says, "Well, pick it up. You can." And I picked it. I couldn't play that. I couldn't. Yeah, that takes a lot of coordination with the bellows going in and out. But so I
yeah.
gave it up. Gosh, when did I give it up? At some point, maybe eighth or ninth grade. I don't know if I went that long, but no, I lost that skill. Not that I was ever very skilled at it, but yeah, I lost it.
I was telling Chad, I said, yeah, she picked up the accordion of all instruments. And then Chad says
I
to
know.
me, oh, well, there were traveling salesmen who sold accordions. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly it.
Yeah. Well, the accordion lesson salesman came to the door, and that's how I got involved. But you know why I was so interested in taking the accordion is that my parents watched the Lawrence Welk show,
Yep.
and
Oh,
you two aren't old enough to probably remember that.
of
But
course we
not
are.
only did Lawrence Welk play the accordion once in a while, but he had an accordion player on there called Myron Flourn that I was just really taken with that playing. I loved that music that he played. That was great, and they all did the polka too.
Well, you know the definition of perfect pitch is when you throw the accordion into the trash bin and it hits the banjo.
Oh,
That's
probably.
The accordion.
Yes.
We
I
have
do love a good polka, though.
I was gonna say, yeah, we love
Yes, I
some
know.
polka around
Beer
here.
barrel polka was my favorite. That's what I wanted to learn to play. I was
Nice.
determined that that's what I would learn to play.
Did you ever get it? Did you get that under your fingers?
Yes, I was able to do it. Not quite like Myron Thorne with all those shaking
Oh, so
accordion
many
bellows and
frills.
everything. Yeah, yeah, I tried, but no, I didn't get quite to that good. But I still have pictures of uh, the accordion school. It was a whole accordion. Accordion was very popular back then, and there was actually this Frank Umbro accordion school, and they would put us on the back of flatbed truck for the fair parade every year, and we'd be sitting, all of us in little chairs on that truck, playing the accordion as we were pulled down the street for the parade, which, by the way, would never happen. If when I look at the pictures, there's nothing, there's no railing, there's nothing around the edges of the truck. It's luckily somebody just didn't topple over with their accordion onto the street.
Seriously, yeah, just in a regular
Yeah,
chair.
You are a bit top heavy
yeah,
when you have an accordion
Yeah,
strapped around your
yeah,
shoulders.
exactly.
indeed.
Right. But things were so lax back then. People just didn't think
And
about those kinds of things.
somehow most of us survived.
I've played a couple
I
gigs on
know.
a flatbed.
Have you?
Oh,
Yep.
did you? Yeah,
A couple pep band
yeah,
gigs in high school.
Nice. But
yeah.
not
And
the
it probably was
accordion.
no railing around it.
Nope, it's horrifying.
Oh my gosh. Talk to us about your writing process.
Well, I'm a rewriter. I'm big on
Mm,
rewriting. Whoever said that all writing is rewriting is something that I certainly believe. So I would start writing when I started, at the very beginning, started writing the book, and I started with that chapter of my father losing his fingers, and then had thinking back to the trial. And I probably wrote about 10 chapters, and then I thought, oh, no, this isn't right. So then I started all over again, and I put something else in front of that first chapter about the lawnmower.
mm,
And then I would write, maybe 20 chapters or more. And I would keep going back. I would just keep going back to the beginning and rewriting and making changes, and then continuing on, so that nothing is ever said about that lawnmower now till almost at the end of the book.
mm, mm-hmm. Isn't that
So,
great? I think that's
yes,
actually
so
wonderful.
yeah, and I would notice as I was writing, this is my first book,
Mm,
and even though I had always gotten compliments about my writing when I was growing up, and when I was a principal, I wrote lots of grants for the school. We got a lot of great grants on my writing style, but I didn't know how to write uh, like this with scenes and dialogue and descriptions until I went to UCSD, till I went to that program, and then took some classes through Writers Inc. and went to the reading critiques. So as I wrote the book, I became a better writer. A lot of
mm.
writers will write one book, and then their next book is a better book, and then the next book, or they write art or essays. I just worked on this one book. So I was really learning to be a better writer as I wrote this book. And I think that's part of the reason I kept going back, because I would get to a part and I think, this really sounds a lot better. I'm writing better. I better go
Yeah.
back and fix all that other stuff. So yeah, that's how I wrote.
And we've had some stream of consciousness authors on this podcast,
Hmm.
and I have no idea how they can make that happen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like they just
right.
front to back and they're done. On to the next one.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. No,
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't do that with this one. And because I'm a big reader and I read some really good authors. I've mentioned that in the end of the book that I really like true crime, and this story affected that interest. But I also read all kinds of other books. And so I feel like I know a well-written good book when I see one. And as I kept writing, I didn't see that in mine yet. I just had to keep making things better and making, like, increasing the tension and having to do away with some of the things that I love, but maybe didn't really um, help the book move along. And so I was learning and improving as I went.
Well, I'm glad you stuck with it.
Yeah. I liked the writing process. I liked just working on my own. After all of those years as a school principal, where I used to say you're like an aircraft or an air, the controller, airline
Air
controller. Is
traffic
that what it's
controller.
called?
Yeah.
Air traffic controller. I used to feel that way sometimes. At a research, they'd be or people be lining up at my door with various problems, and I loved the solitariness of just
Mm.
writing in my office.
It's almost
Enjoyed it a
meditative,
lot.
isn't it?
Yeah. And boy, when you get the somehow that there was some chapters once I wrote, I didn't have to rewrite those much. It was just like
You
I was
knew.
just uh-huh. And the
Yeah.
last chapter of that book, Life Goes On, I knew that that's how I wanted to end the book from
Mm.
very early on. And
Mm.
I would just kind of throw little ideas in this folder. When I wrote that chapter, I really did just write it straight through. It just seemed to just come off my tips of my fingers as I was typing.
Nice. I'm
But
guessing
others I just struggled.
you struggled with. Well, I was gonna say,
Other chapters I really struggled. Yeah.
yeah. There's a lot to this book and so much research, but I was gonna say that that chapter that just as you say just like came out no problem. My guess is that you did a lot of thinking about that chapter before you actually put it to
Right.
paper.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And
Tell,
I do, and I would probably wrote 3 or 4 hours most days,
mm,
and
yeah.
I would write in the afternoon. I would go to the gym in the morning, and then I would write in the afternoon, and then maybe I would go out for a walk. And I live in near the beach. I live in Mission Beach, and I would, especially like low tides, go out and walk in the afternoon and just think about what I had written. And I usually had my phone with me, and if I got some idea, I would record that on my phone. Other days I walked on the boardwalk, but walking and thinking about what I had written, and then coming back and making a few notes, and I was ready to go the next day.
Nice. Can you talk about your process to getting published, your journey to getting published, I should say?
Yes, yeah, I would like to talk about that because obviously anybody who reads the book and does the math knows that I'm a woman of a certain age, and I didn't really start seriously writing until quite late in life. And I would go to writers' conferences, and I would, hear people talk, going to little sessions about getting published. And I learned early on that possibly publishers were not all that interested in signing up older writers, and that so agents not so either, because they wanted to get authors that would write a number of books. That
Sure.
in the publishing business, if your first book is good, you develop a little bit of a fan base, and then your second book, those readers come back, and you maybe get more. So you build on your success. And
Right.
if you were an older author, well, there was a little worry if maybe you wouldn't be around to do that, if you get my drift. So I had heard that maybe that there was this prejudice against this. I also knew that I had a mixed genre. I think that that's more acceptable now, but early on, when I was, beginning writing this book, that publishers didn't like mixed genre. They wanted to be able to sell. If you were a science fiction fan, they want to be able to, market the book to those fans. And so, and that I'll get to it when I get to past the agent, but that did turn to be out to be a little bit of a problem. The other thing that we've talked about, this is a long book, and that my first book for a first time author needed to be maybe only 250 pages, half of what I eventually wrote. And seems like that there was something else that was an issue. But you know what? Every once in a while, somebody would say, but you can break all those rules if you really write a good book.
That's
So I
right.
thought, okay, well, I'm going to concentrate on trying to just write a really good book
Yeah.
that people would want to read. And I even felt like I had a really good story. It was just a matter of how could I get it down on paper that would make a book that people would want to read. So I kept writing and writing, and I have a couple of sons, and one of them is also an aspiring writer. And he said, you know, Mom, they're having the Santa Barbara Writers Conference, and you should take your book. It's practically done, and this whole story started in Santa Barbara. That would be a good place for you to go. And so
Yeah.
Smart kid.
Very smart. Yeah.
yeah. And so we went, and I did one of what they call advanced readings, where you turn in 10 pages, and I did it with an agent, and then you meet with them at the conference, and they give you feedback. If they like your 10 pages, they may ask you to send 50 more, and you know, then it goes for there. And the idea is hopefully you might get an agent. I had done that before, and I had sent in some. I'd gotten some feedback from agents, but I didn't actually know anybody who had gotten an actual agent to sign an agent agreement to represent their book. So anyway, when I sat down with Charlotte Gousset from the Charlotte Gousset Literary Agency, we had a few pleasantries, and she said, "Oh, and I just really love your writing and everything, and I want you to send me your entire manuscript." And so
Wow.
the top of my head almost blew off with
I
confetti,
bet.
you know, like coming out. And so I said, "Oh, okay." And so she said, I said, "Well, I've got to finish the epilogue, or, you know, whatever." She says, "Well, that's okay. I'm going to Greece for this is in June, the whole month of August. So you don't need to send it to me until the fall." And I said, "Great."
Nice.
So, I went home and I just started working on that and getting it all together. So I sent it to Charlotte, and I mentioned this. She read it, and she got back to me after a while. It was more than maybe 2 months to hear back. And she said, "You know, I really like this in a lot of ways, but I'm just up in the air, and I think I'm going to have to take a pass."
Hmm.
But she said, "If you would be willing," and she said, "I really believe that the family chapters start to slow down the crime chapters. And if
Yeah.
you would be willing to rewrite that, if you submit it to me again, I'll take another look."
Wow.
So I did.
Yeah.
I thought, shoot, I've got somebody interested here. She
Right.
says she loves the story and everything. I feel like that this was so fortunate that I had somebody who read the whole thing and liked it. I just went ahead and I said I would do that. So I spent a lot of time. I got an editor, uh, a local editor, Mark Clements again, who I felt like he knew the book so well, and to help me decide what I could cut out. So he made a lot of suggestions, and I also found places that I wanted to cut. And I could really see at that point that pace is important, and
Yeah.
she wanted me to pick up the pace. And so once I kind of really got that concept, I was able to make those changes. So sent it back to Charlotte, and another couple of months went by, and she arranged for us to have a Zoom call, and she said that she would like to me to sign with her if I was interested. I said, "Oh
Right,
yeah,
right.
yeah,
You're like, let
I'm
me
still
think about
interested."
that. I'll get
And
back to you.
so then we spent quite a bit of time uh, coming up with a book proposal, because it is nonfiction. At first, she thought maybe because a lot of memoirs don't have to have book proposals, but you know, uh, I think the second or third editor that she sent it to at the publisher said, you know, I really want to have a proposal for this. So we worked on that for a couple of months, and then she started pitching it again. We had to come up with a pitch, and I did a whole lot of things once I got this agent. I thought, you'd get an agent and then that would be it, but no, there
Right.
was a lot of work that I still
Hmm.
needed to do. And so the mixed genre seemed to be a little bit of a problem.
Hmm.
Charlotte is a very experienced agent. She has represents a lot of different books. She's represented some that have one in particular that made the long list for nonfiction and for the National Book Award. So and she really knows these editors, and she would always send me the emails that they had sent back with the rejection so that I could see. And I could tell that there was a personal relationship with these people. So as time went on, a few people said, well, maybe you should look for somebody else. And I said,
No
this
way.
lady really
Yeah.
seems to know people here. And so it was a problem with, I remember more than one publisher said, I do true crime, but I really wouldn't know how to market this book because it's not strictly true crime. And so, Jennifer, here's where you come in. I'm sitting around at this point, not having much to do, and I had always been told at these writers' conferences that I needed to have a site. And so I didn't exactly know what I was to. I always just think, well, I wouldn't know what to put on a website. I haven't published anything yet, but I managed to get some ideas and everything. So I contacted Monkey See Media, and I wanted to put together a website that I would be able to have pictures and to, tell the story a little more than was in the book proposal, and a lot of things on that. And I know I maybe not you personally, but the first publisher that had access to my website is the one who offered me the book contract.
Wow.
Pegasus Books.
So it did make a difference.
It did make it. I've never asked that editor, because it was the website. But, I think people could see that story pictured there better. I had all those pictures, and I had an opportunity to write this in my own way. And because early on, going to those writers' conferences, when I would go to the parts about, you need a social media presence and you need to have a website, I would just sort of, go over the top of my head because I couldn't think what to do about that. I just kept writing. But once I was done writing and Charlotte was pitching, then I thought, okay, now I need to have a website. And now it's been very helpful for marketing. I hear from readers from all over the place. Just got another one today. They send me emails through that website, and it's very, very gratifying for people who send these messages to me that how much the book meant to them.
That's wonderful.
So
that's wonderful. What a great story.
And once I did get that publisher signed the book contract, nobody said word one about the book being too long. Nobody said anything about me being too old. Nobody, so I thought, and I was still so worried that maybe the book was a little long. And I thought, well, maybe somebody's going to come to their senses there, and I'm going to get this email that says, hold it. We didn't realize.
It was so long.
Yeah, but no, nobody did. And, I said this, I've heard this from many, many people. It's such a fast read that people just don't notice.
It never drags.
Yeah.
And when I first got the book in the mail, I was like, oh boy, this is a long book. This is Dostoevsky.
War and Peace.
Yeah. Right.
What's
well,
happening?
It's It's 518. I think it's 518 pages or something. And books are getting longer.
They are.
You do discover that books are getting longer, and so it's not such an issue anymore. But yeah, it is a fast read.
Well, honestly, the more I got into it, the less I wanted to put it down. And it was a fast read. It was a pleasurable read. I mean, for all of our listeners, this is a fantastic book. It's a fantastic book for people who love memoir, who love humor, for those who love true crime. I never ever felt like, oh, this is too much. There's the details when they find the body, and that's hard to read. It really is. It's like, it's so sad what happened to this young woman, but it's so compelling because this character, this Elizabeth Duncan, who's on trial here, her character is just out of this world. And I think this story needed to be told for a number of reasons, but I'm glad you stuck with it. I'm glad I got to be Monkey See Media, and Chad and I got to be part of the process. So, and this has been a real,
definitely.
Thank you. This has been a real pleasure just talking to you about it. We're about to the end of our hour. I have to let you go, even though I know I have a million more questions I wanted to ask. But my last question is this. What's next? What can we expect from Deborah Holt Larkin next?
Well, I won't be writing a true crime another true crime story because, that was the other thing. I didn't really have a platform to write a true crime story. It's usually a detective or a journalist that covered the case. And I just don't have the kind of information that I had to be able to write this book. So I plan to go back to fiction. And to what my original plan was when I wanted to be a writer, which was that I would write mysteries, possibly, cozy mysteries with an amateur detective.
I can totally see it. Yeah.
That's what I plan to do.
I almost wanted.
I have a plot.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to be 10.
I have probably not, but I have a plot in mind. But when I was going to write this cozy mystery at the beginning, try to turn the Duncan case into that, which it's not really a cozy, but it will be set on a rural school campus with the amateur detective being probably the principal or teacher at that school, and I have quite the plot for that one.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I, for one, will be reading it. So get her done.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you again,
Sooner
Debbie.
than 9 years.
Yeah, yeah, please.
Oh, yeah, I know. I haven't got 9 years left for right now, I think. But yes, I want to. And as soon as things settle down with this current book, because I do a lot of things to, continue to market my book. But as soon as I am finished with this, I will definitely be writing. I have a folder that I keep putting all these ideas into.
Nice. Well, I guess we'll say goodbye. Debbie, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, and thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed talking.
You can learn more about Deborah Holt Larkin at deborahlarkin.com. There you can join her mailing list, check out some of the photographs, see more of her story, and follow her on social. This has been another episode of The Premise. Follow us at Pod Premise on Twitter and go to thepremisepod.com to subscribe. And be sure to rate us wherever you get your podcasts. Until next week, thanks for listening. Goodbye.
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 Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to The Premise, the official podcast of the San Diego Writers Festival.